Let's call this back to order. This time I'd like for Darren Ryder, Chief of Law Enforcement, to come up and show us the video of our boys in work at South Carolina.
Thank you, Commissioner. Here again, it worked perfect during breaks, so it probably is not going to work now. We are going to try it.
You were close, but you just could not get there because there was a river where a highway used to be.
East Tennessee volunteers return from historic flooding in South Carolina. We're going to hear how they dealt with daily work as those floodwaters raged and their efforts to save lives. Good evening and thank you for watching. I'm John Becker. Robin Wilhoit is off this evening. Here is the latest from South Carolina. I-95 is finally opening back up after that major road spent more than a week underwater. It serves as a key East Coast interstate link between Maine and Miami. Cleanup is now a top priority. The American Red Cross is handing out work supplies and tools. Garbage pickup is underway for the rest of the week. About a dozen volunteers from East Tennessee are just back from that disaster zone. WBIR 10 News reporter Leslie Ackerson explains how they made a difference in moments of crisis.
We were plucking people off of cars that had been swept into woods. At times it was knee to waist deep water that was flowing. To get into the center of that water where somebody may be trapped is a pretty difficult process.
The images and memories are powerful, and it's what Sergeant Roy Smith faced daily for a week in South Carolina.
Yeah, we weren't really sure what to expect. I don't think anybody knew exactly what we were getting into.
Activated on Saturday, October 3rd, Smith and a crew of 7 other TWRA officers traveled to Columbia, immediately launching search and rescue missions.
There were lots of vehicles that were abandoned that had been washed off roadways. There's no way to know whether there's someone in those vehicles unless you physically go check those vehicles.
With bridges collapsed and roads gone, rescues were challenging.
It made travel not only dangerous, but just difficult to find your way around.
John boats and special water vehicles enabled the crews to navigate the flooded landscape.
I've got a 2-year-old little girl, and one of the rescues we did was a 2-year-old little girl off the top of a car, you know, and that really hit home. But we were able to get her and her family out. Probably the most gratifying thing I've done in my career was get that family off that car.
Sometimes the biggest help was simply their presence.
Job satisfaction is at an all-time high when you get to actually go in and help somebody and be something of a comfort in a otherwise just rough spot for them.
A tough job, and he's ready to go again when called. In Knoxville, Leslie Ackerson, 10 News.
Quite a story there. Smith's team returned home Saturday. Another team of state wildlife officers, 8 in all, arrived in South Carolina Friday.
Thank you, Darren, and like I said again, we're really proud of those boys.
If you know about smoke rings,
and they make us look good, so we thank you for doing such a good job with them.
Thank you.
All right, we're moving back into our committee session now. Fisheries Management Committee, Chairman David Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to call Frank Fisk, Chief of Fisheries.
See if I can get the commercial off. Go away. Okay. Let's see here. 5. Okay. Yesterday I came with Proclamation 1527, and the edits that are in the red line in your binder are the recommendations that we made from staff and presented in August, and again presented yesterday. And then the second half of the Sport Fish Proclamation discussion yesterday were river extensions of reservoir regulations, and those were made at the request of Commissioner Baker, and I put those together and described where those are and how we manage those rivers. And I just want to say that my intention for that presentation was for you to know that we manage those rivers as rivers, not reservoirs, because there's different characteristics of those rivers, and we have fishermen that do harvest a little more fish in those rivers, and we wanted to continue that opportunity. As you know, yesterday there were amendments to extend those smallmouth bass regulations from reservoirs into rivers. and I have them summarized here for your discussion today. But again, these are not what our staff was interested in doing.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a comment, or I have a question, if it be all right?
Mr. Chairman, the Fisheries Committee and I recommend passage of proposal proclamation 15-27 sport fishing.
Thank you,
As
Chairman.
amended.
Thank you, Chairman Watson. We have a motion on Proclamation 1527 as amended. Do I hear a second? Second. Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion on this proclamation as amended?
Yes,
Chairman Rip,
I had a
Ripley.
question. As I understand these river extension amendments, we are, with that, we are impacting the boat fishermen, certainly. But what is the impact on those who fish from shore? And is that something that we've really considered? And it just seems to me that's something we need to look at as well.
Frank, would you care to address that for us?
I'd like to. The river fisheries are they're fish from shore on up above the reservoir, like we were talking about. They are fish from shore. They're probably fished out of kayaks and canoes and everything else, but they're not people that are coming up from the reservoir to fish them. They're probably more local fisheries. You got 50 miles of river, for example, on the Holston. People are probably not driving more than a few miles to get to the river to fish and come home in a lot of these cases. That river is managed with that slot limit to allow harvest of fish below the slot and one fish over. And we know that people do participate in that fishery in that way. And I think that they might think of that river as their fishery to be fished the way they do, not necessarily how a reservoir angler might want to do that. So we haven't heard a lot of comment from that group, but that tells me that we don't know what they're thinking when they see this.
Well, that's a concern. I don't know how the rest of the commission might feel about that, but I just raise that as a concern that I have.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you, Commissioner Ripley. Commissioner Cannon, do you have any comments?
I got a couple of questions based on that and from what I've heard. The Douglas Reservoir extensions, I understand most of what we're adding in here can be, well, on the 321 on the French Broad, that can be navigated up to the dam on a semi-regular basis by a regular boat. Is that
On the French Broad River?
on Douglas? Let's see.
On Douglas, it was
Yes,
only
sir.
going up.
French Broad or Pigeon.
Frank, I don't want to put you on the spot. The slide presentation that you had yesterday,
Yeah. Oh, sure.
can you pull up that picture?
Yeah.
Well, and I misspoke. The French Broad up to the Douglas Dam, that can be navigated with a boat on a semi-regular basis if the water is up. Is that a
Douglas Dam.
or Bart? Can you help?
Fort Loudon,
Fort
yeah,
Loudon,
not
yeah.
on Douglas. Okay.
Fort Loudon to the Douglas Dam, we've been told that you can navigate it.
I've not done it personally. I guess I would like to ask Bart Carter to help describe the characteristics of that, because he's out there shocking on it.
Bart, would you come up
And I'll pull up that
to the podium?
slide.
Bart Carter, Regional Fisheries Manager in Region 4. Yes, that is correct. On the French Broad, which we're discussing right now, at minimum flow, you can, with a jet boat, you can navigate the majority of that river. On the Holston side, it's more difficult, and that's the situation that we have there. So, coming from Loudon in a jet boat at low flow on the French Broad side, you can make your way up through there. It's not easy, but you can do it.
Can you tell me about the Tellico extension? I hope I'm asking this correctly. It looked like we had three categories. We had Fort Loudon, we had Douglas, and then we had Tellico. And I voted on it yesterday, and I'm sorry to be so thick-headed this morning. Are there any issues on navigating the extension being proposed for Tellico?
I'd like to, if we could, ask the Mark Thurman, who
Mark
manages
Thurman.
that river, to.
Yeah. That's in a different region.
Mark Thurman, Regional Fisheries Program Manager in Region 3 out of a Crossville office. That's not a very navigable river upstream of the reservoir. Where we currently have the upstream limits in the fishing guide at the Big Creek Boat Ramp, I believe it's called. You start getting into pretty shallow river habitat not too far upstream. So we don't have a lot of people running up that river like you might have on the French Broad. I think that would be safe to say.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I may.
Did that
suggest
answer your
something.
question, Commissioner Cannon?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I may have another question or suggestion a little bit, but let me open it up to the rest of the commission.
Is there any other discussion on this, on the extensions?
Yeah, let me, just for clarification, we were talking about, or I understood we were talking about the navigability of a regular prop-driven boat, not a jet boat. You indicated that it would be sometimes navigable further upstream with a jet boat. What about a tournament bass boat? I mean, how much access or how far up on the French Broad or whatever would they be able to get up?
Well, under generation, 1 or 2 units of generation from the dam, a prop motor could navigate up the river, but at low flow, minimum flow.
Which river? The French Broad or?
The French Broad.
Okay.
Yeah. From Fort, right. So there would be some access, particularly at two unit generation out of Douglas Dam for a prop motor. On the Holston, 1 unit, probably not with a prop motor. As far as running very far, you're going to run into obstacles or shoals exposed, that kind of thing. At 2 units, either one of these rivers, you could probably navigate with relatively little risk with a prop motor. But low flow, 1 unit, there's going to be hazards. That answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Any other discussion?
Frank, could you put the slide back up that had the extensions, please?
Yeah, I recognize we need that now.
Well, you know who you're dealing with, and I'll forget my name here in a minute. But
let's go here.
Bobby be getting ready.
There we go.
Who's Bobby? I don't know him. All right. One last question, and then we'll do something. My understanding with respect to the Douglas Reservoir, a prop-driven boat can navigate the French Broad. Let's go to Fort Loudon Reservoir. I'm sorry. Fort Loudon Reservoir. Between Fort Loudon Reservoir and Douglas Dam on the French Broad River, with just 1 unit generating, a prop-driven boat can probably make it up there reasonably well, definitely under 2 generators.
Yeah, I would say for sure with 2 units.
Thank you.
One would be, there may be some situations where a person would have to get out
And we're not asking you for a warranty if somebody dings their prop, I promise, okay? All right. On the, still talking about the Fort Loudon Reservoir, on the Holston River, that's just, unless it's an unusual amount of generation, we're not going to get a prop-driven boat up there. And
Right.
and as Frank said, it's people who have parked pretty darn close to where they're going to fish anyway.
Right, and generally speaking, on these rivers, when they're most heavily utilized is when it's at low flow or minimum flow, because
Yes, sir.
that's when we have the wade fishermen, that's when we have the kayak fishermen, that's when we have the canoe fishermen. So at 2 units, the I guess the appealing factors there with the river is not as great as when it's off.
Okay, Mark, point of clarification, you can nod if you want to. On the Tellico Reservoir, the extension that was included in yesterday's amendment just probably innavigable with a prop boat, period. Am I hearing you correctly there?
It is not navigable.
Okay.
And it doesn't fit in the characteristics of the Tellico River on that, just upstream of that boat ramp I mentioned. It's not the same as either of those Fort Loudon tributaries.
Yes, sir.
Because we don't have a generation, so it's free flowing river. So it's really not. It doesn't fit into that same category even really.
Mr. Chairman, we want to create fishing opportunities for our boating public. There's no question about that. But we also have the bank fishing community and the people who wade. And it sounds like we inadvertently, and I was a part of this, I confess, jumped the gun on two of these extensions that really aren't applicable to the boating community. So I'd like to propose an amendment to the motion as was approved yesterday, whereby we would remove the extensions of the on the Fort Loudon Reservoir for the Holston River to Cherokee Dam, and I would like to remove the extension of. There's not an extension on Tellico Reservoir, so it's just a slot limit. Maybe I've screwed up here.
Oh, there was. It would be extend the existing regulation on Tellico Reservoir, which is that 18-inch size limit. So if you were looking to remove that extension, it would be this whole paragraph, because we wouldn't need to follow up with that other slot limit stuff.
What is staff's recommendation on Tellico Reservoir?
Mark and I have discussed this, and we would not recommend extending the regulations into the Tellico River.
Understood. So then I would ask that those two portions of yesterday's amendment be stricken from what we vote on.
Which two is that?
Tellico and the extension of Holston River up to French Broad, Holston River up to Cherokee Dam. Have I royally confused everybody?
Motion has been made to amend the amendments yesterday to remove the Fort Loudon regulations from the Holston to Cherokee, and also to strike the Tellico Reservoir amendment. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion on this amendment? Any from the audience? All in favor to this amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The amendment carries. Back on proclamation 1527, sport fishing regulations as currently amended today. We have a motion and a second. Any more discussion on that proclamation as amended today? Any from the audience? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Proclamation 1527, Sport Fish Proclamation, as amended today, carries. Chairman Watson?
Thank you, Chairman. Frank?
Thank you. I think I'm going to save this. Okay. The other proclamation that we brought before you yesterday was the live bait proclamation. It was pretty straightforward. We're changing those crayfish regulations in those watersheds, and defining, trying to limit the amount of movement of these invasive species. And we're also just further defining who can sell bait fish, harvest and sell bait fish.
Mr. Chairman, the Fisheries Committee and I recommend passage of proposed Proclamation 15-28, live bait.
Motion has been made. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion been made and seconded by Commissioner McMillan. Any discussion from the Commission on Proclamation 1528? Any from the audience? All in favor of Proclamation 15-28, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Chairman Watson, and thank you, Frank, and
Thank you, Commissioners.
all the commission. And moving on now to the Budget Committee. We apologized yesterday for rolling that committee, so when I turn it over to Chairman Cannon, we will do the committee part of it first, and then we will move over to the full commission. So, Chairman Cannon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Recognize Barry Sumner's Assistant Director to speak to the investment of TWRA funds. Very briefly, Commission and Committee, these first two items are direct follow-ups to matters that in this particular one took place at our last commission meeting, and then Bobby will be speaking to a matter that came up earlier this year when we did the license fee adjustment. Barry, I'll give it to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cannon. Just to give you a very brief recap of where we are on this. It's been about a year ago, the commission and the agency started working with the state treasurer trying to get a better interest rate for some of our funds. We've had good success doing that at this point. We had really 4 pots of money that we needed to address. The lifetime license endowment fund, we've taken care of that one. It is now invested in what we think will be a much better fund, getting us a better interest rate. Similarly, the Watchable Wildlife Endowment Fund has been invested. We still need to address 2 funds, one of them being what we call the Wildlife Fund, the other one the Boating Fund. And those 2 funds are sometimes called our reserve funds or our rainy day funds, but really they're just a part of the agency's operating funds. What we are proposing is taking the amount of those funds that we don't think we're going to need for at least the next 3 years and investing them for a higher interest rate. So we tried to take a real close look at this. We don't want to invest too little and miss that better interest rate. We don't want to invest too much and not have access to money that we need. The agency's recommendation is that we invest $12 million from the Wildlife Fund, $4 million from the Boating Fund, and we will basically be just moving this money from where it is now with a very low interest rate into a different fund with hopefully a much better interest rate.
Barry, thank you. Very low interest rate right now is being very generous in that statement. I would call it 0, and this would be, I believe, if I recall correctly, at least today somewhere around 1.93 as presented by the Treasurer's Office. Committee, just as a brief reminder, one of the thresholds that we set was to make sure that no less than 3 months operating revenues were available to us, that we protected that. That was the absolute bottom threshold for the rainy day fund. And the amount in both of these funds that Barry is recommending is consistent with that recommendation, or that practice that we established as part of our latest budgeting effort. With that as a preamble, is there a motion to approve staff's recommendation? Do I have a second?
Second.
This is for the Budget Committee vote. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to give that back to you on behalf of the Budget Committee. We have approved a motion recommending the investment of $12 million from the Wildlife Fund and $4 million, Barry, from the Boating Fund to put in a long-term interest-bearing account.
Thank you, Chairman Cannon. Motion has been made to reinvest the $12 million from Wildlife and $4 million from Boating into a higher interest. Do I hear a second?
So moved.
Motion been made and seconded by Chairman Watson. Any discussion from the commission?
Let me ask you a quick question. What is the current balance in the wildlife fund?
At the beginning of this fiscal year, it was 28 million.
All right. What is the, when you talk to the treasurer's office, how long would it take to access funds?
Yes, they did not give a specific time period. It would depend on how much we're withdrawing, but they did indicate we would not have immediate access to that money, and they would probably need to know several months ahead of time if we were going to make a substantial withdrawal.
I guess my question is, we've got 28 million and we're only depositing 12, and that's, I guess you said 3 years you kept out. I wonder why we would not consider a year and on a year-to-year basis, and it might take 3, 4, 5 months to get the money. Why would we not put a little more money in there rather than keeping the majority of the money in a low interest? I just wonder what the thought process was.
Commissioner Cox, a great question. I apologize to the committee. I should have asked for questions from the committee on this. The fund looks very good right now. When we went through our budget exercise, and Barry, I'm going to ask you to hold me accountable here. We have a lot of expenses that are going to hit us this fiscal year that will drain that down significantly. And we are projecting that in 2 years, if I recall correctly, that fund balance will be at best 18 million, and we may be closer to 15 million. Is that correct, Barry?
That is correct. We're gonna hit that fund kind of hard this year.
And one of the challenges that I personally asked Barry and the staff to do is we set that absolute threshold at 12 million, and to go below that in any reinvestment would just be contradictory to our philosophy that we established. There is concern, of what could happen this year, that we may dip below 15 million, closer to that 12. And so for at least this fiscal year, Commissioner Cox, that I'm not going to say that was a feel-good number. I think it was the best compromise we could get with staff until we get through this year to see what our actual expenses are. If our actual expenses are less, if we're able to have more in our rainy day fund, I believe there's a consensus with staff that they would recommend we take the rest of that money and invest it. But we're just not sure what this year holds, sir.
Any other discussion? Motion has been made and seconded to invest 12 million from the wildlife fund, 4 million from the boating fund into a higher earning long-term investment. Any more discussion from the audience? Hearing none, all in favor of reinvesting those funds, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Chairman Cannon, back to the Budget Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee recognizes Bobby Wilson to discuss the Reelfoot Preservation Permit fee. Brief history. When we did the license fee increases, we had proposed an increase to the preservation permit. After public input from a variety of the resort owners there, Commissioner Cox, and wisely so, asked us to freeze it at its current amount until we could look into this further. What Bobby's going to be presenting is indeed that follow-up that we promised both the commission and that community.
Thank you, Commissioner Cannon. Just a little brief history and the purpose of the Reelfoot Lake Preservation Permit for those who are not familiar with it. It was created back in, I think, around 1985 for the sole purpose of acquiring land around Reelfoot Lake. It was later amended to allow for maintenance of the lands around Reelfoot Lake. And so the TWA took out a loan with the state for this purpose, and that loan was paid off in 2011. And the permit is required for hunters and anglers and boaters and bird watchers if they get out on the water, and anybody else that gets out on the water that uses Reelfoot Lake Wildlife Management Area. What And if you've got any more specific questions, I'll answer them. But basically what we would like to do is to, if it's a consensus of the commission, is to go forward and conduct a public meeting up at Reelfoot Lake in the next couple of months, so that we can not only give you an update of the results of that meeting, but also provide you with information that might help y'all make a decision on what to do about the permit maybe at the January commission meeting.
Bobby, thank you. The thought process behind this is that we're going to be in West Tennessee in January, and it seemed like the right thing to do, that if we were going to do any adjustments to how this fee was to be modified, if at all, that would be a good meeting to do it at. I guess I'm asking the committee, and then Mr. Chairman, I'll be asking the commission, this isn't so much of a vote as it is a consensus to allow first staff to prepare what they would recommend the necessary documents to be if we do indeed consider this at our January meeting, with the understanding that this is not saying we support reducing any changes to the fee today. We're asking staff to bring a recommendation to us at the January meeting and the appropriate action that we need to take, with the further understanding that there is going to be a public meeting up at Reelfoot to discuss this item as well as a couple of others, so as to make doubly sure that the public has ample opportunity to tell us what they believe needs to happen up there. And with all my yapping, I guess what I'm asking is there anyone on the committee that would be opposed to proceeding in this manner? If not, then Mr. Chairman, I would ask that that same question be posed to the commission.
Likewise, to go through what Chairman Cannon said, any objections to directing the agency to have a Reelfoot Preservation Permit public meeting and forum?
Well, I have a question of what's the impetus for looking at this? Is it just time to review this, or what's brought this to this point?
Chairman Cannon.
Commissioner, the original intent of this fee was to purchase lands around Reelfoot, and that it completed its original intent in 2011. All the notes were paid off. We have been using it some for maintenance. One of the complaints that came out at the January meeting and in subsequent meetings with the Reelfoot community is that the preservation fee, while it's not a great expense, anyone who fishes on Reelfoot also has to pay that fee amount. That's the only place in the state, and Reelfoot is a WMA, that a fee is imposed like that. It is making it difficult, frankly, competitively for that community with other states and other areas of our state. This would be a step towards bringing Reelfoot into more keeping with what we require of other WMAs across the state. And it seemed like that they have asked us to look at it. It seemed like a reasonable request, sir.
Any other discussion from the commission? Any discussion from the audience? Hear none. Bobby, I guess we direct you to get the wording up for the public forum.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Bobby.